Hello class, and welcome to Module 4. In this lecture, we're going to be talking about the evolution of leadership theory. So let's get started. It's important to note that leadership theory did not start in a vacuum, right? That it evolved over many, many years. And this chart here shows the evolution of leadership theories. One of the earlier theories is what's called the great man theory, and it goes all the way down to what we call the contemporary or modern theories of leadership, which are represented by these three here: charismatic leadership, transactional leadership, and transformational leadership. Another one that could be added in here, which is probably the most current one, is authentic leadership. So those four: charismatic, transactional, transformational, and authentic leadership would all fall under the category of contemporary or modern leadership theories. We're going to start by talking about the great man theory, and then we're going to move into trait theory, behavioral theories, and on down to the modern theories of leadership in this lecture. So buckle up. Let's get started. The great man theory of leadership really focused on the behaviors or the attributes of people. It was a theory that was developed by Thomas Carlyle back in the 1800s, mid-1800s. And what he did was a survey of what he regarded to be great men, which it appeared that history revolved around. Now, I'm going to explain this, but we could also say there's lots of problems with this particular theory because Thomas Carlyle was of European descent, first off, and many of his theories, or what he considered to be great men, they were actually men of very significant contribution, but they were men significantly embedded within his culture. So you don't see great men that were African or great men that were Asian, found in his studies. Mostly European great men, people like Alexander the Great, Plato, Socrates, individuals along those lines. And what he did was he looked at their history and he collected a set of attributes that each of those men had, traits that each of those individual men had. And he proposed a theory that said that great men have these particular traits. Great men have these attributes. On this slide, we have noted 4 of them, right? Intelligence, confidence, charisma, sociability. There are many more, and one of the components of his theory had a physiological component, which meant that he looked at the physical traits, the physical attributes of men, and he came to conclude that these physical attributes were in fact linked to success. And I want to kind of point out here that he took a historical look. Thomas took a historical look, and he said, at what point were there great nexuses or great change points in the world? And then what men were responsible or at the center of those change points? And that's what he based his theory around. And part of his theory basically argued that when the time was needed, when history needed a strong person with certain attributes and traits, that person was born. And history kind of shaped that person, but they were born with those attributes and those characteristics and those traits designed to be able to fulfill that particular role that history needed them to fulfill. While this may be a somewhat controversial example, but I do believe it's appropriate, we could look at the man Jesus Christ, for example. According to Christian teachings, Jesus was not born simply a man, but he was born a divine man, a person who was both man and God at the same time. If you will, he was born for a time such as that, a time to turn the world on its head, to create a significant turning point in history. And this would fit the great man theory. So he was born with these attributes. They weren't learned or derived later on, or the situation was uniquely set and ripe for change, and here came a person who pushed it over the edge. No, instead, great men were born just that. They were born great, and they developed and flourished into the role of great men, and as such, they drove profound change within society around them. To this extent, some of the physiological attributes that Thomas Carlyle argued great men had were things where they were tall, they were handsome, they were intelligent, they had larger than normal sized heads. And we know here in the 2000s or the 21st century, 22nd century, that we got lots of problems with that theory. But back in the 1800s, this is what the theory evolved around. Eventually, this theory was challenged, okay? And people concluded that maybe it's the size of a person's cranium is not necessarily a predictor of success, because here's some people that are small or who are not tall or who have small heads who went on to be significant leaders. For example, here's a leader that stands 5'6", while he's a male, but he started a successful company. So this flies in the face of the great man theory. One other great drawback of the great man theory is the fact that it kind of says you got to be a man in order to be successful, hence the great man theory. And back in the 1800s, they weren't thinking the great man as in a general term to describe both women and men. Man meant men, okay? So we know today that there are many significant female leaders that are out there who have done tremendous things. I could name a bunch of them right now. I won't for the sake of time, but we know that that's not true. So many faults and failures with this particular approach, and it argues that people were born leaders; they're not made leaders. The next theory that kind of evolved after the great man was trait theory. Now, it maintains some of the key attributes of the great man theory, specifically that people are born with traits that give them a greater likelihood to be successful. But it focused less on physiological or physical traits, but more so on, psychological traits or behavior, not behavior, so to speak, but traits that people have in their personalities. So here's a list of traits, knowledge of the business, initiative, tenacity, energy, creativity, charisma, emotional intelligence, confidence, honesty, and integrity. These are all the traits that great leaders should have. And this theory definitely moves us a bit further down, a little bit further away from this idea of, being completely born and having no choice. But it's really saying that people who have these attributes, they're going to be successful leaders, and people who don't have these attributes are not going to be successful. They're going to be ineffective leaders. So, but it does contend that you either have these traits or you don't. So it's kind of black or white. If you have these traits, you'll be successful. If you don't have these traits, you're not going to be successful. So right away, we could find some complications or some problems with this theory, namely that, can a person learn any of these traits? Can you learn to be more tenacious? Can you learn to be more flexible? Or are you you're a certain personality, is that level of flexibility in your personality, is that fixed? Or can that evolve and change over time? Does the situation have anything to do with a person? So you could find yourself in one situation and you can be very rigid, but in another situation, very flexible. So what role does the situation play in terms of a person's success and leadership? Well, needs to say, well, this theory definitely moved us, I think, in a better direction than the great man theory, and away from, kind of some homophobic type of belief sets around the great man theory. It still has some holes in it. Still has some issues with this particular theory, because here's somebody who's not very charismatic, but they were a successful leader. Here's somebody that's low energy, or a person that may be very dishonest, okay? And yet they have were successful, have a history of leadership and a history of success and accomplishment. How do we explain that? And the trait theory left us lacking for that. It left us wanting a little bit more understanding. Next became a school of thought around behavioral theories, okay? So behavioral theories focus on how leaders behave rather than specific traits that they have. And one of the core differences between the behavioral theories and the trait theories, or trait and the great man theories, is that behavioral theories contended that you can actually learn. You can change your behavior. You can engage in different types of behaviors. That leaders can be made rather than born. And this is a pretty pivotal change, right? Because before it was pretty black and white. Either you're born a leader or you're not, or you have these traits or you don't. And if you have the traits, good job, you're going to be successful. If you don't have those traits, then you're not going to be successful. Well, behavioral theories kind of blurs that line and makes it a bit more, I believe the word I would use is a bit more apropos to reality, okay? So you can learn traits, you can learn behaviors, okay, not traits, you can learn behaviors that can empower you to be a successful leader. So to this extent, anyone can be a great leader. You just got to learn the right behaviors. Now, this theory definitely pushes us a step further, I believe, in the right direction, but it has some holes in it too, because I would argue is simply acting out the behaviors sufficient enough. Okay? So one, what if you don't believe in something, but yet you go through the behaviors? Is that sufficient enough to drive success? Is that compelling enough to get followers to follow you? And I would argue that, and sometimes maybe it would. You could fake it till you make it, so to speak. But other times, it's not sufficient. People want a level of authenticity. And if you're acting on something simply because you were told that this is how leaders should behave, but you don't believe it, that's not in your heart, then it's going to manifest ultimately in your actions and behaviors, and you're going to seem inauthentic, and that's going to influence the people who follow you. Also, this theory doesn't really contend much with situations or followership theory. If you have the wrong set of followers, and you're trying to lead them, what role does that play? Or if the situation makes it easy for for you to lead, or if it's a tougher situation, maybe you're coming into a company as a leader or a manager, and that company is under financial distress. Well, that's a very different situation than taking a leadership role in a company where they're on a high and they have financial overflow. So behavioral theories definitely moves us away from that idea of leadership being fixed, leadership only being reserved for certain people who have certain traits or that are born a certain way, and puts it in the hands where anyone can grow in or evolve into leadership. But we can look at it and clearly see that this theory in and of itself is still not exactly complete. So we already kind of talked about the comparing and contrasting of behavioral theories and trait theories, but I want to call out this important distinction, namely that behavioral theories argue that you could train a person to be a good leader, all right? And they're going to argue that no matter what. So they're going to tell me their answer with the answer of a scholar who believed in behavioral theories would say, to any objection that I offer, you can learn skills and behaviors to help cope with this particular situation. So if you have followers that don't match your particular style, you could learn other leadership styles to deal with those followers. If you have changing situations, like I mentioned just a moment ago, you can learn behaviors to help you cope with or be successful in those situations. And perhaps that is true. Perhaps it is not true. I don't think it's as easy as the scholars would have us to believe. Trait theory, on the other hand, is very specific. It says, you can't change your makeup, right? So we kind of get a little bit into this idea of personality, and can personality change over time? That's a significant debate within the psychology departments. And some people say, yes, you can change your personality, that with enough hard work and diligence and development of habits, you can change your personality. Others say that no, you cannot, that after a certain age, your personality is essentially fixed, and that's your personality for the rest of your life. You can learn coping mechanisms or behaviors, but the gist of your personality stays the same. Well, trait theory falls on that side of the equation. And they say, look, if you have these traits, you got them. If you don't, you don't have them. However, what is important if you want to be successful is matching the right person to the right situation. Okay, so you want to have a leader, a leader with specific traits, following people for whom those followers understand, appreciate, and value those traits. So when I was in high school, I had a coach who was very tough, very dogmatic. If you were to do something inappropriate, he would yell at you. It was not uncommon that he may throw things or get in your face, put his finger in your face, and punish the whole team because somebody made a mistake. He was a very, very tough leader in that situation. Well, according to trait theory, that's kind of who he is and what he is. Therefore, if he's going to be successful as a coach, he needs to have people on his team that understand that style of leadership and that can work well in that style of leadership. You probably don't want to put him with a team that is made up of individuals who are highly emotional and very sensitive, because that style of leadership and those types of followers will not pair together very well, and failure will be the natural result. Therefore, according to trait theory, and you'll see some other theories coming up in just a moment, they argue that pairing leaders, examining the type of environment, the type of followers, the type of situation a person's walking into, understanding that fully and finding a leader who balances with that is really important. While behavioral theories, and you'll see another theory, situational theory, they argue that It doesn't really matter what the situation or the context is, but people can learn to cope. They can learn strategies to deal with that. Now let's do a quick side-by-side comparison between behavioral theories and trait leadership theories. So one, the definition, and we spoke with this before, trait theories argue that leaders are born with certain traits, that they're born with it. Whereas behavioral theories say that leaders are not born, instead they are trained and developed, okay? Trait theories argue that it's the characteristics of the leader that makes them successful. Behavioral theories argue that it's the skills and abilities that the leader learns over time that empowers him to be successful. He may learn from his own experiences, he may learn from others, he may learn through direct experience or by watching other people, but it's those skills that he or she ultimately learns that empowers him to be a successful leader. And then lastly, trait theories, right along with the great man theory of leadership, they argue that physical traits, they do matter, right? A person's height, their weight, their emotional disposition, their looks, they all do matter in terms of a person's leadership abilities and successfulness as a leader. Now, I will say this, that there are a number of research studies that look at physical attractiveness and career success, and there most certainly is a strong correlation between physical attractiveness and career success. And these researchers have found that the more attractive a person is, the more successful they're going to be in their career. You know, that there is definitely a correlation, and that people that are less attractive have a harder time achieving the same levels of success as people that are attractive. And by attractive, we also include tall, because tall people are generally regarded as being more desirable, especially when it comes to men, than people that are overly short. When it comes to the behavioral theories, they throw this out the window, and they conclude that there's no physiological traits that anybody, whether you're tall, short, big, small, white, black, orange, purple, doesn't really matter. But as long as you can learn the right behaviors of leadership, then you yourself can be an effective leader. So we can see how the behavioral theories are much more empowering to people than, you know, the trait theories would be. Here we're going to look at situational leadership theory versus contingency leadership theory. And you're going to see how both of these theories, they're theories of leadership, but they do build off of the foundation of traits and behavioral leadership theories. So let's get started. Contingency leadership theories states that a leader's effectiveness is contingent upon how his or her followers, you know, match up to their leadership style. So once again, we're getting back to that idea of matching the right people. And you can look at the grid to the left, and you'll see that there are, for this particular leadership style, that there are 4 types of leadership. You have participating, okay? You have selling, you have telling, and delegating. So participating, these are individuals, they lead by consensus. They lead by getting feedback from their followers, from their employees, and they incorporate that information into whatever their decisions that they're making, and that's how they lead. So it's very democratic in a sense. I'm not saying it's completely democratic, because there definitely is a leader, but they get feedback from those that they work with, and they want to have that feedback in and incorporate that into decision making. Selling, this leader is constantly trying to sell or persuade people to follow him or her. So they engage in activities and behaviors designed to communicate the values of the values and the benefits of their particular strategies and recommendations in order to get people to buy into it. So they're constantly selling and convincing people to follow them. So you can imagine right here, if you were very charismatic, that would really help you with this particular leadership style. The other style here is telling. Telling means that you're directing someone what to do. You do this, you do that. It's a very direct, very autocratic style of leadership, where you're not interested in getting feedback from other people. You're primarily interested in people doing what you have told them or instructed them to do, and you lead in that type of manner. Delegating. So delegating really refers to a leader that takes some of his followers and empowers them, gives them positions of authority, gives them the responsibility and to make certain decisions and the authority to carry them out. And as such, they may focus on things like training and development, coaching and mentoring, but they really have what their primary focus is developing a team underneath them that can help execute what needs to be done, and then empowering that team to go off and do it. So you'll see here that the transformational leadership style, which is one of our contemporary leadership styles we'll talk about toward the end of the lecture, really fits well into the delegating sphere. Going back to contingency leadership philosophy, contingency says, look, if you're a participating style of leader, then you need to find an audience or a situation where that style of leadership will be successful. If you're a telling or an autocratic type of leader, then you need to have a situation that matches with that. So we could take a look at President Obama and Donald Trump as two different examples. Obama would be more of the delegating type, where he seeks to empower people and then give them direction and authority and expect them to go and do their jobs. Whereas Trump is more of a telling or an autocratic style of leadership. So the idea here is that if we went into the White House under both administrations, we would contend that the teams or the individuals working for each president would be dramatically different, and that their abilities to cope with and thrive underneath specific leadership styles would be different. Those that really can deal with that transformational style of leadership, that delegating style, they would be very successful under Obama. Those that can take direct orders and instructions and kind of that tough, hard-handed approach that Donald Trump tends to have, they will be more successful under Donald Trump. Therefore, Obama should lead his people, Trump should lead his people, and they should not switch followers. If they did, then they may not be successful. That would be the situational style leadership philosophy. Okay, but that would be the contingency style of leadership. It says that you shouldn't switch them. Instead, find the right leader for the right situation. Okay, it assumes that the leader cannot adopt his or her style, and instead they should focus on matching their style to the situation. When there is a mismatch, the odds of success are greatly reduced. In contrast to the contingency style leadership, we have what's called situational leadership. And this refers to when a manager or organization, they must adjust their style to fit whatever is going on, to fit their audience. And here, much like our behavioral theories, the argument is that you can change, that you can adapt. So it would argue, if a person believed in situational leadership, they would argue that my coach actually can change his style and coach a team that is more emotional, that is more in touch with their feelings and expressive in that manner. The scholars behind the situational style of leadership, we have pictures of both of them here, okay? But the fundamental principle of the situational leadership model is that there's no single best style of leadership, and that in fact leaders should be able to jump and switch styles as appropriate depending on the situation and the people that are following them. Effective leaders are task relevant, and to that extent they will switch styles and adjust and remain flexible so they can achieve their ultimate goal and their ultimate task. So task relevant in this situation, unlike many personality models, is not saying that you are devoid or ignore people's feelings, that you're the task and the task only. It says instead you are willing to adjust yourself, how you lead, how you mentor, how you coach, your level of autocraticness. You're willing to adjust that to the situation so that the task can ultimately be resolved. Effective leadership varies, not only with the person or the group that is being influenced, but also depends on the task, the job, the function, and what needs to be accomplished. Now we're going to get into our modern theories of leadership. We're going to talk specifically about transactional leadership, charismatic leadership, and transformational leadership. We have pictures of individuals that fit all those different categories. So let's get started. We'll start with transactional leadership. So transactional leaders, they view the relationship with their followers as an exchange of goods and services. Much like if you go to Walmart and you buy a bag of potatoes, you're not there to establish a relationship with the clerk who's checking out your groceries. You're there to get your groceries. You're going to give them money. They're going to give you the potatoes, and you're out the door on your way. That's what we call a transaction. There's no true investment in emotions and feelings and development and coaching and mentoring. None of that stuff is taking place. It's simply an exchange of goods and services. So transactional managers view their employees as people who are coming to work primarily to get some benefit, which is mostly you're going to be viewed as your paycheck, right? It could be insurance and benefits or whatever, but these are things that the company is offering to the employee. And in exchange for this offering, the employee provides their services, their time, their labor to the organization. And that really is the extent of the relationship. So they would expect you to be on time, to be functional, to be they are pragmatic leaders. They'll make sure you get the benefits that you're expecting. And in return, they expect that the company is going to get the benefits that the company is expecting. So with transactional leaders, do not expect ongoing mentoring. Do not expect some charismatic style of leadership where they're going to persuade you to go above and beyond. Their expectation is that you'll do the appropriate amount of work and you'll give the appropriate amount of effort. And in exchange for that, you'll get the benefits that were promised or communicated to you. This is what I would call the lowest level of management or leadership style, certainly of the three contemporary styles we're going to discuss here shortly. We're discussing now. The next one we want to talk about is the charismatic leadership style. So you can see here, I got a picture of the Prime Minister of London, or Prime Minister of England, Boris, and he would definitely fall in the category as I would define as a charismatic leader. Okay, so another example would be Donald Trump is another example of a charismatic leader. A charismatic leadership style relies on charm and persuasiveness. Now, I'm not saying that these are particularly charming people, but what I am saying is that their platform, what they argue, their politics, they are charming and captivating to a specific audience. Okay, so charismatic does not mean that your charisma works on everyone. It means that your charisma is working on your followers, and that charisma or those attributes, they inspire people to want to follow you. Okay, charismatic leaders are very vision oriented. They are extremely focused on accomplishing what it is that they are passionate about. So that goal that they're set out with, it's important to note that the goal that they are trying to accomplish is what's number one for them. Okay, achieving the goal almost by any means necessary is more important to them than their followers. And this is a big difference between that transformational theory and charismatic theory, is that charismatic leaders are willing to, if necessary, sacrifice their followers or make huge sacrifices or require others to make in large sacrifices, also that the goal will be accomplished. So their primary focus is the achievement of the goal. And there's something that is inherently charismatic about a person who is completely sold out to a certain vision. Whether you agree with the vision or disagree with it, people who understand that vision and that see the value in it, they will be compelled by a person who is 100% sold out to that vision. Okay, and that's what they're passionate about, and everything they do is working in that direction. So charismatic leaders are driven by their convictions and their commitment to the cause, and the passion that they show about that, the way they articulate those convictions, the way they get that platform out in front of people, that is inherently charismatic, and it draws people into them. Charismatic leaders are also sometimes misunderstood as transformational leaders because there's a lot of similarities between transformational leaders and charismatic leaders. But I want to tell you the biggest difference is where their focus lies. The charismatic leader's focus is myopic. It is focused on the goal and achievement of the goal, while the transformational leader is focused on the development of their followers. Here's some pictures of people that I would define as charismatic leaders. You have Joseph Stalin, Dave Koresh, Jim Jones, and the Prime Minister of England. If you remember back in the World War II, Stalin, was one of the leaders there, and Germany had conquered, I want to say about maybe 80% of Russia, and Russia's on the brink of losing. And one of the things that Stalin said was, you better get out there and fight, because you had many soldiers who were defecting. They had lost courage, lost hope. They were defecting. And Stalin said, look, if those who defect, shoot them. So, you turn around and run from the battle, you're going to get shot by us, your fellow comrades. Or you could run towards the Germans and fight them and have a chance at living. So once again, what's most important? It wasn't the followers, it was accomplishing the goal, which was to defeat Germany, okay? And we look at the results of that. Russia did have a huge surge. I'm not saying this is the only reason for that surge, but they had a huge surge. They drove Germany completely out of Russia and then retook, I want to say maybe 60% of Germany before the Allies came in, and you had D-Day and all that kind of wonderful stuff. So the Russians really were the big heroes of World War II. Now, David Koresh would be another example. And in that, we know that you can look that up if you don't know his story, but it ended tragically with the standoff with the federal government. He could have at multiple times surrendered or let people who wanted to leave, who would still be alive today if he had done that. However, he stuck to the convictions that he had, and many more people died who didn't have to. Jim Jones follows that same pattern with having his followers drink cyanide. Even those that found out what was going on and tried to get away or escape, they were forced to drink it. Children likewise. So his convictions were what was most important to him, not those of his followers. Now, these are not the greatest examples of charismatic leaders, but they are examples of charismatic leaders, and they really point out that significant difference between a charismatic leader and a transformational leader. Now, here on this slide, I have pictures of what I would define as charismatic leaders. You have Billy Graham, Franklin D. Roosevelt, who is, I argue, to be one of the last, greatest, and most significant presidential figures in America before America kind of took a major shift in its political position to that of a neo-colonialism type of a militaristic approach to global leadership and global expansion. But FDR really was the last president before that type of change was made, and he was involved in World War II and drove a lot of changes. For example, he required the European countries to sign to an agreement, say that they will release their colonies, the countries that they have colonized. He said that all you've done is gone and raped and pillaged these poor places and extract wealth and resources from them for your own benefit, and left the people in these colonies destitute and hurt. And he, knowing that he was in a position to do something about it, stood up for that and said, if you want America involved in World War II, then you need to free your colonies as a condition of our involvement. And England and many of the other European countries, they agreed to this, which is why, after World War II, many of those colonies were released. After he died, however, new people took over the government, and then you have the new sense of neo-colonialism that took place underneath America, where we weren't colonizing countries, but we did so through military expansion and economic dependence. So another conversation for a different time, but you can see that FDR, Billy Graham, you have Oprah, you have T.D. Jakes, they're all a very different style of leadership. They are all very charismatic. There's no doubt about that. But the difference between charismatic leaders and transformational leaders is the focus on the followers. So each of these leaders believe that the way they will be successful is by empowering people to be their best. And in their followers being their best, the followers understand the vision, they understand the purpose that the leader is trying to accomplish, but the leader firmly believes that he or she cannot do it on their own, that the only way they're going to achieve their goals is by fully empowering their followers to be the best individuals they can be. And then when they're the best they can be, they're going to push forward the vision with a greater sense of purpose than the leader could do by him or herself. So that's the primary difference between a transformational leader and a charismatic leader. A transformational leader would never allow his or her followers to suffer. If they could do anything about it, they would never allow them to, fall on their sword and become hurt or damaged in the pursuit of their goals. Instead, they would stand up to try to protect their followers and empower their followers to do the best that they could possibly do. This slide here gives you a compare and contrast between transactional leadership, transformational leadership. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'll pick out a handful of them. When it comes to short time frame, transactional leaders are very short-term oriented. Transformational leaders are long-term oriented. When it comes to direct supervision, kind of either any micromanaging, transactional leadership feel that's very important. You have to make sure those people do what they're supposed to do. Make sure they deliver that service that they promised. If we're going to be paying them, they need to do the work. That's the mindset of a transactional leader. Whereas a transformational leader says that direct supervision is less important because the people are motivated themselves to accomplish the vision. So their job is more so empowering that person to be the best leader he or she can be so that they can charge toward that vision together. Okay. Where does change occur? In follower behavior. The transactional leader is focused on compliance. Do what I say. It could be do what I say or else, but they're focused on the behavior, whether the employee agrees with it or not. They're focused on compliance. They want to, what the follower is doing, what the employee is doing is what's most important. The transformational leader, however, focuses on the attitudes and the values and beliefs of their followers. They believe that if you have the right attitude, the right values, the beliefs, if you're bought into our vision, then you're going to naturally comply with what needs to be done. You're going to motivate and self-correct yourself. If you find yourself kind of going off track a little bit, you're going to correct yourself because it's important to you as an individual to achieve the ultimate goal. So those are a couple of differences between transactional and transformational leaders. That wraps it up for this lecture. Hope it was helpful. If you have any questions, be sure to send me an email. Thank you very much and have a great day.